Picture this. It's the dead of winter on the Great Plains. The temperature has plummeted to 40 degrees below zero. Howling winds tear across the frozen landscape with nothing to stop them for hundreds of miles. Snow piles up in massive drifts, and in the middle of this frozen hell, families are sleeping comfortably inside what looks like a simple tent made of animal skins stretched over wooden poles. No furnace, no insulation from a hardware store, no electric blankets, just brilliant engineering that modern science is only now beginning to fully appreciate. By the end of this video, you'll understand why the teepee wasn't just a tent. It was one of the most sophisticated pieces of survival technology ever created, and why some of its design principles are so advanced that architects still study them today. Stay with me, because what you're about to learn will completely change how you think about survival, engineering, and the ingenuity of indigenous peoples. The winter reality of the Great Plains. Before we dive into the incredible technology of the teepee itself, we need to understand exactly what we're talking about when we say winter on the Great Plains. This wasn't just cold weather. This was a level of extreme environmental hostility that most modern people simply cannot fathom, even if they live in cold climates today. The Great Plains stretch from Canada down through Montana, the Dakotas, Wyoming, Nebraska, Kansas, and into parts of Colorado and Oklahoma. This is a massive expanse of largely flat or gently rolling grassland with very few trees. And that lack of trees is absolutely crucial to understanding the challenge. You see, when winter storms swept down from the Arctic, there was nothing, and I mean nothing, to stop them. No mountains to break the wind, no forests to create microclimates. Just thousands of miles of open land where the wind could build up speed and ferocity. Winter temperatures on the northern plains regularly dropped to 20, 30, or even 40 degrees below zero Fahrenheit. But temperature alone doesn't tell the whole story. It's the wind chill that truly defines the danger. When you combine those sub-zero temperatures with winds that could easily reach 30, 40, or 50 miles per hour during a blizzard, you're looking at wind chill values that could drop to 60 or 70 below zero. At those temperatures, exposed skin freezes in less than 5 minutes. At those temperatures, breathing the air can damage your lungs. At those temperatures, any mistake, any failure of your shelter or clothing can be fatal within hours. And it wasn't just the cold. Winter on the plains meant whiteout blizzards that could last for days, where visibility dropped to zero, and stepping outside your shelter meant you might never find your way back. It meant ice storms that coated everything in a thick layer of frozen armor. It meant sudden temperature swings where a relatively mild day could plunge into deadly cold within hours as a new weather system moved in. The snow itself presented unique challenges. On the open plains, wind-driven snow doesn't just fall and settle. It drifts, creating massive piles on one side of any obstruction while leaving other areas nearly bare. This constantly shifting landscape of snow could bury a poorly designed shelter or expose it to even worse wind conditions. And here's something most people don't consider. The length of winter on the northern plains. We're not talking about a few cold weeks. Winter could effectively last from October through April, 7 months of the year when survival depended entirely on preparation, knowledge, and technology. 7 months when hunting became difficult and dangerous. 7 months when simply staying alive required constant attention to the details of shelter, fire, food, and clothing. Now imagine you're living in this environment, but you don't have access to any modern materials. No fiberglass insulation, no polyester fleece, no propane heaters or electric blankets. No weather forecasts to warn you when the next blizzard is coming. No hardware store to run to if something breaks. Everything you use to survive must come from the natural world around you. Animals, plants, stones, and wood. And it must be portable because your survival also depends on following the buffalo herds that provide your food, clothing, and the shelter materials. This is the reality that Native American tribes of the Great Plains faced every single year for thousands of years. And not only did they survive, they thrived. They raised children, maintained complex societies, created art and music, told stories, and lived full, rich lives in conditions that would kill most modern people in a matter of hours without their technology. So, how did they do it? The answer lies in an interconnected system of knowledge, technology, and practice that was refined over countless generations. And at the center of that system was the Tipi, the Tipi. More than just a tent, let's get something straight right from the start. Calling a Tipi a tent is like calling a smartphone a calculator. Sure, technically it's accurate on the most basic level, but it completely misses the sophistication and multifunctionality of what you're looking at. The Tipi is a marvel of engineering that incorporates principles of aerodynamics, thermodynamics, structural engineering, and material science. It was refined over thousands of years through trial and error, with each generation passing down their knowledge and making small improvements. The result was a shelter so well adapted to its environment that it could keep a family warm and safe in the most brutal conditions imaginable, could be erected or taken down in less than an hour by a small group, could be transported easily, and could last for years with proper maintenance. Let's start with the basic structure, because even this is more clever than it first appears. A tipi consists of a conical framework of poles, typically between 12 and 25 of them, depending on the size of the dwelling, covered with a skin covering that was traditionally made from buffalo hides but could also use elk, deer, or other large animal skins. But here's where it gets interesting. The tipi is not a perfect cone. The floor plan is not a perfect circle, and the cone is tilted. The back of the tipi is steeper than the front, and the floor is slightly egg-shaped rather than circular. This asymmetry is not an accident or a limitation of the construction method. It's a deliberate design choice that serves multiple functions. First, this shape makes the tipi more aerodynamic. The steeper back can face into the prevailing wind, allowing the wind to flow up and over the structure, rather than pushing against a vertical surface. This reduces the wind load on the structure and makes it much more stable in high winds. Native Americans had figured out through generations of experience what modern wind tunnel testing has confirmed. This tilted cone shape is remarkably efficient at shedding wind. Second, the tilted design creates more interior space where it matters most. The rear of the tipi, which has the steeper angle, is where people typically slept, and the extra headroom makes this space more comfortable. The front of the tipi, with its gentler slope, is where the door is located, making entry and exit easier. The structural poles themselves deserve attention. These were typically made from lodgepole pine, which grows straight and tall. In areas where suitable trees weren't available, poles were a valuable trade commodity. Each pole could be 15 to 25 feet long, depending on the size of the tipi. The poles were carefully selected and prepared, the bark removed, the wood allowed to dry and season properly. The poles aren't just leaned together in a simple cone. There are specific configurations, with different tribes using slightly different methods. The most common approach involved first creating a tripod of 3 or 4 poles tied together at the top, and then leaning the additional poles around this initial framework. The poles are not tied at a single point, but are woven together in a specific way that locks them into position and allows them to support each other. At the top of the tipi, where the poles come together, there's an opening for smoke from the fire to escape. This opening is controlled by 2 ear flaps, extensions of the hide cover that are attached to adjustable poles. By moving these poles, the inhabitants can open, close, or direct the smoke hole to account for wind direction and weather conditions. This is crucial because proper ventilation is essential not just for removing smoke, but for managing the interior temperature and humidity. The hide covering is where the tipi really shows its sophistication. In traditional construction, this cover was made by sewing together buffalo hides, typically 10 to 20 of them for a medium-sized tipi. The hides were painstakingly prepared, scraped, cleaned and softened, then cut to precise patterns and sewn together with sinew using bone needles. But here's what's remarkable. The hide covering is not a single piece wrapped around the frame. It's a semicircle that's pinned together at the front, creating a door opening. Wooden pins, similar to large lacing pins, hold the two edges together, and they can be quickly removed to open the door wide for entry and exit, or to allow air circulation on warm days. The bottom edge of the hide cover extends beyond where it touches the ground. This extra material is held down by rocks or wooden stakes, creating a seal against the ground and preventing drafts from blowing under the walls. In winter, snow could be piled against this edge, creating an even better seal and adding insulation. At the door, a separate hide flap hangs from a pole or from the top of the door opening. This can be moved aside for entry or dropped down to seal the entrance. In severe weather, multiple layers of hides might be used at the door, creating an airlock effect. Now here's where it gets really interesting from a materials science perspective. Buffalo hide has properties that make it nearly ideal for this application. When it's dry, it's relatively stiff and provides good structure and wind resistance. When it gets wet, it swells slightly and the fibers tighten, actually making it more waterproof and draft-proof. As it dries, it shrinks back, pulling tight on the frame and maintaining the structure's integrity. It's naturally somewhat breathable, allowing moisture from inside the teepee to slowly escape rather than condensing on the inside surface, which would be disastrous in freezing temperatures. The hide is also naturally somewhat translucent, especially when scraped thin. This means that during the day, sunlight filters through, providing natural lighting inside the teepee. On bright days, especially with snow on the ground reflecting sunlight, the interior could be surprisingly bright without any artificial lighting. The physics of staying warm. Now that we understand the structure, let's talk about the real magic. How this design kept people warm in deadly cold. The first thing to understand is that the teepee is not insulated in the way modern people think of insulation. There's no thick layer of fiberglass or foam between you and the outside air. The buffalo hide covering is only about a 1/4 inch thick, so how does it work? The answer lies in understanding heat transfer and air management. There are 3 ways heat is lost from a shelter: conduction, convection, and radiation. A well-managed teepee addresses all 3. Conduction is heat loss through direct contact with cold materials. The teepee minimizes this by creating multiple layers and air gaps. But we'll come back to that in a moment when we talk about the liner. Convection is heat loss through air movement. Cold drafts coming in, warm air escaping. This is what the teepee manages brilliantly. The hide covering, when properly sealed at the ground and pinned together at the front, creates a remarkably draft-free environment. The slight breathability of the hide is actually an advantage because it allows moisture to escape slowly without creating drafts. The smoke hole at the top is carefully managed with the ear flaps to allow smoke out while minimizing heat loss. But here's the clever part. The teepee uses convection in its favor. As the fire in the center of the teepee heats the air, that hot air rises toward the smoke hole. But before it escapes, it heats the upper portion of the teepee, which radiates warmth back down. The cooler, fresh air enters at ground level through the controlled breathability of the hide and through careful management of the door. This creates a natural convection cycle that constantly circulates air while maintaining warmth. Radiation is heat loss through electromagnetic waves, the way you can feel cold radiating from a window in winter. The fire in the teepee radiates heat in all directions, warming both the people directly and the objects and surfaces around them, which then re-radiate some of that warmth. Now let's talk about what might be the most ingenious part of the entire teepee system: the liner, or dew cloth. Inside the teepee, suspended from the poles about 5 to 6 feet off the ground, and extending down to the ground around the entire perimeter of the teepee, is a second layer of hide, or in some cases, woven cattail or reed mats. This liner doesn't go all the way to the top of the teepee. It leaves the upper cone area open. This liner serves multiple crucial functions. First, it creates a dead airspace between itself and the outer hide covering. This trapped air is an insulator, significantly reducing heat loss through the walls at the level where people are sitting and sleeping. Second, the liner extends down to the ground and then angles slightly outward and upward before it's suspended from the poles. This creates a small channel at ground level where cold air that seeps in under the edge of the teepee is directed upward in the space between the liner and the outer covering. This cold air then rises as it's warmed, eventually exiting through the smoke hole. Meanwhile, the warm air from the fire stays in the living space inside the liner. The result is essentially a convection current that continuously removes cold air from the floor level and exhausts it outside, while keeping the warm air in the living space. It's like having a built-in heating and ventilation system with no moving parts. The liner also prevents condensation from being a problem. When warm, moist air from breathing, cooking, and other activities meets a cold surface, it condenses into water. In freezing temperatures, this water would then freeze, creating ice on the inside of your shelter. Extremely bad news. The liner keeps the warm, moist air away from the cold outer hide. Any moisture that does condense on the outer hide is in the non-living space between the liner and outer covering, where it's less problematic, and the air circulation in that space helps carry it away. Additionally, the liner provides another layer of insulation through radiation. The hide or mat material absorbs heat from the fire and from the people, then radiates it back into the living space. This creates a much more comfortable environment. In extreme cold, additional steps could be taken. Some tribes would stuff the space between the liner and the outer covering with dried grass or sage, creating even more insulation. The liner itself might be made from hides with the fur left on, providing additional insulation. The fire, the heart of the winter. Tipi at the center of the teepee was the fire, and managing this fire was an art form that every member of the community learned from childhood. The fire in a teepee is not like a campfire outside. It's smaller, more controlled, and carefully managed to provide maximum heat with minimum smoke. The wood selection matters enormously. Different woods burn at different temperatures, produce different amounts of smoke, and create different types of coals. For winter fires, tribes preferred hardwoods that burn hot and create long-lasting coals. Ash, oak, and cottonwood were prized where available. The wood was typically quite dry, having been collected and stored during better weather. Some tribes would collect dead, standing wood which was naturally dried, rather than fallen wood which might have absorbed moisture from the ground. The fire was built in a shallow pit in the center of the teepee, typically only a few inches deep but carefully constructed. This pit served several purposes. It contained the fire, preventing it from spreading. It provided some shelter for the fire from drafts, making it burn more efficiently. And it created a slight depression that helped with heat distribution. The warmth radiating from the fire would heat the floor around the pit, creating a warm zone where people could sit comfortably. The size of the fire is crucial. Too large, and it produces excessive smoke that overwhelms the ventilation system and wastes wood. Too small, and it doesn't provide enough heat. The goal was a fire that created a deep bed of hot coals rather than large flames. These coals radiate steady heat for hours and produce minimal smoke. Managing the smoke was a constant task. The ear flaps at the top of the teepee needed to be adjusted as wind conditions changed. On calm days, both ears might be open wide to allow maximum ventilation. When wind was strong, they might be adjusted to create a venturi effect, where the wind passing over the opening actually helps draw smoke up and out. In some conditions, the ears might be positioned to prevent wind from blowing down into the teepee. The fire also had to be tended throughout the night. Someone, often taking turns, would wake periodically to add wood and ensure the fire didn't go out. Letting the fire die completely in extreme cold was dangerous, as restarting it would be difficult and the teepee would cool quickly. Usually, a large piece of wood would be added before everyone went to sleep, and the fire would be rekindled from the remaining coals in the morning. But the fire did more than just heat the space. It was also where cooking happened, where ice and snow were melted for water, and where clothes and moccasins could be dried. Wet clothing or footwear in extreme cold is more than inconvenient. It's life-threatening. The ability to dry these items by the fire overnight was essential. The fire also provided light during the long winter nights, which could last 15 hours or more at northern latitudes. This allowed for work to continue, repairing tools and clothing, preparing food, or simply maintaining social bonds through conversation and storytelling. There's also a psychological element to the fire that shouldn't be overlooked. In the midst of a howling blizzard, with wind shaking the teepee and cold pressing in from all sides, the warm, flickering light of the fire provided not just physical comfort, but psychological reassurance. It was the heart of the home, the center around which family life revolved. Sleeping arrangements and bedding how. People arranged themselves for sleep in a winter. Tipi was carefully thought out and based on generations of experience. The space inside the tipi was typically divided into areas with different uses. The back of the tipi, opposite the door, was considered the place of honor and was usually where guests would be seated or where the family's elder members or leaders would position themselves. The space near the door was considered the least desirable, as it was closest to the cold outside air whenever the door was opened. For sleeping, thick bedding made the difference between comfort and misery. The floor was first covered with sage, sweet grass, or other dried plant materials. This created a slight cushion and, importantly, provided some insulation from the cold ground. On top of this were layers of buffalo robes, hides or furs. These weren't just placed flat. They were often layered and arranged to create more insulation underneath than on top. Here's why. In winter, you're sleeping in an environment where the air temperature inside the teepee might be comfortable near the fire. But as you move away from the fire and closer to the ground, it gets colder. The ground itself is a massive heat sink. Without insulation underneath you, your body heat conducts directly into the frozen earth, and no amount of blankets on top of you will prevent this. So the key was creating substantial insulation between your body and the ground. Buffalo robes were ideal for this. A buffalo robe is the entire hide of a buffalo, with the fur left on. These robes were incredibly warm, naturally water-resistant to some degree, and durable. A family might own multiple robes, and these would be layered to create a thick, insulated sleeping area. People typically slept with their heads toward the outer wall and their feet toward the fire. This makes sense when you think about it. Your body generates less heat at your extremities, so having your feet closer to the fire helps keep them warm. Your head and torso, which generate more heat, are further from the fire, but still comfortable because of the overall ambient temperature maintained by the fire and the tipi's insulation system. Sleeping arrangements were communal. Families slept together, and in extreme cold, this body heat sharing was another layer of warmth. Children might sleep between parents. Multiple people under shared robes created a warmer sleeping environment than individuals separated by air gaps. Clothing while sleeping was also important. People didn't strip down to minimal clothing as modern people might in a heated home. They typically kept substantial clothing on, soft buckskin or tanned hide garments that provided another layer of insulation. Extra robes or furs could be pulled over the top as blankets. In extreme conditions, the teepee's door might be further sealed with additional hides hung inside the door flap, creating multiple layers of protection against the cold. Some families would even stuff the space between these layers with dried grass for extra insulation. Before sleeping, it was important to attend to certain details. Any snow tracked in had to be removed, as melting snow would create moisture problems. Clothing that had gotten damp during the day needed to be arranged near the fire to dry, but not so close that it would burn. Moccasins were particularly important. Wet moccasins in the morning could mean frozen feet during the day, which could lead to frostbite. Water was often kept in the teepee overnight, usually in bags made from buffalo stomach or bladder, hung near the fire where it wouldn't freeze. Having liquid water immediately available in the morning was important, as melting snow takes time and fuel. Preparing for winter. The work began in summer. Of the winter survival we've been discussing would be possible without extensive preparation that began in the spring and summer. Winter survival on the plains required not just good shelter technology, but careful planning and hard work during the seasons when weather was more forgiving. Buffalo hunts in summer and fall were about far more than just meat. Every part of the buffalo was used, and many of those parts were essential for winter survival. The hides taken in late summer and fall, when the fur was beginning to grow thick for winter, were the best for making robes and for creating or repairing teepee covers. These hides had to be carefully processed, scraped clean of fat and tissue, stretched, dried, and then either tanned if they were to be used for clothing or teepee covers, or left with the fur on if they were to be used as robes. Preparing a buffalo hide was labor-intensive work that could take days per hide. The fresh hide was pegged to the ground and scraped with specialized tools made from buffalo bone or stone. Every bit of fat and tissue had to be removed. Then the hide was treated with a mixture often made from the buffalo's own brains, which contain oils that help make the leather soft and supple. The hide was worked and stretched repeatedly as it dried. For teepee covers, the hide needed to be as thin as possible while still being strong, which required skilled scraping. Once processed, these hides had to be sewn together to create or repair teepee covers. This sewing was done with buffalo sinew, the strong tendons from along the buffalo's back and legs. These sinews were separated into thin threads that were incredibly strong when dry, but could be moistened slightly to make them pliable enough to work with. The sewing had to be tight, and even to prevent water leakage and drafts. Firewood collection was a major undertaking. A family would need hundreds of pounds of wood to make it through a winter, and on the open plains, trees were scarce and valuable. Dead wood was preferred for burning, but good-sized pieces had to be found, cut to manageable lengths, and transported back to the winter camp. Some of this work was done with stone tools, and later with metal tools acquired through trade, but either way, it was hard physical labor. This wood then had to be kept dry, often stored inside the teepee or under protective covers. Food preservation was equally important. While hunting could continue through winter, it was more difficult and dangerous, and there were often long periods when hunting was impossible due to blizzards or extreme cold. So summer and fall were times to create food reserves. Meat from buffalo and other game was cut into thin strips and dried into jerky. This concentrated the nutrition, made the meat shelf-stable, and significantly reduced its weight, making it easier to transport. Pemmican, a mixture of dried meat pounded into powder and mixed with fat, and sometimes berries, was even more concentrated nutrition that could last for years if properly made and stored. Berries, roots, and other plant foods were also collected and preserved. Many were dried, while others might be stored in caches, sometimes buried in the ground where they would remain frozen throughout winter. Wild turnips, prairie turnips, and other root vegetables could be stored this way. Preparation of winter clothing was ongoing. Moccasins, in particular, wore out quickly and needed to be replaced regularly. A person might go through several pairs of moccasins in a winter. These had to be sewn from scraped, tanned hide, often with fur lining for warmth. Leggings, robes, dresses, and shirts all had to be maintained and repaired. Sewing and leatherwork continued throughout the year, but intensified in the fall as winter approached. Tools and weapons needed attention as well. Arrow points had to be napped from stone or later, shaped from metal. Arrows had to be straightened, fletched, and maintained. Bowstrings needed to be replaced. Knives needed to be sharpened. Anything that might be needed during winter had to be put in good working order. Because once deep winter set in, obtaining materials or working on repairs became much more difficult. The Tipi poles themselves needed periodic replacement or repair. A set of good poles might last several years, but wind damage, wear from transport, and other factors meant that new poles had to be sourced periodically. In areas where suitable trees grew, this might be relatively easy. In areas where they didn't, it might require trading with tribes that had access to forests or traveling significant distances to obtain them. Clothing. The second shelter. While we've been focusing on the Tipi as shelter, it's impossible to talk about winter survival without discussing clothing. Because in extreme cold, your clothing is essentially a portable shelter that you wear. Native American winter clothing on the Great Plains was a sophisticated, layered system that was remarkably effective. Like the Tipi, this clothing was made primarily from animal skins and furs, and its design reflected deep understanding of how to manage body heat and moisture. The foundation was typically soft, brain-tanned buckskin or deerskin for the inner layers. These materials were soft against the skin and provided a first layer of insulation. For winter, people often wore two-piece outfits, consisting of a tunic or dress and leggings. The tunics for men were often thigh-length, while women's dresses reached below the knee. Over this, buffalo robes were worn. These massive furs provided extraordinary warmth. A full buffalo robe could weigh 15 pounds or more and provided insulation that's hard to match, even with modern materials. The robe was worn with the fur next to the body, which trapped warm air in the dense fur layer. The robe could be wrapped around the body in various ways depending on activity and temperature, and could even be pulled over the head like a hood. For the feet, moccasins were the standard footwear, but winter moccasins were very different from summer ones. Winter moccasins often had thick fur linings, sometimes from rabbit or beaver. They might be stuffed with dried grass or sage for additional insulation. Some tribes made moccasins with extra long tops that extended well up the leg and could be tied at the knee, providing protection for the feet and lower legs. For the hands, mittens were preferred over gloves because mittens keep the fingers together, allowing them to share heat. These mittens might be made from thick fur with the fur side in, or from layered hides. Headwear was crucial. A fur cap or hood could make an enormous difference in comfort because so much body heat is lost through the head. Some tribes made caps from whole animal skins, like otter or fox, with the animal's tail hanging down the back. The layering principle was well understood. Multiple thinner layers trap more air and provide more insulation than a single thick layer. And layers can be added or removed as activity level and temperature change. This was especially important because physical exertion in cold weather creates a dangerous trap. You start to sweat, your clothing becomes damp, and then when you stop being active, that moisture conducts heat away from your body rapidly. Moisture management was critical. Snow had to be brushed off clothing before entering the teepee, where it would melt and create dampness. Hide and fur naturally have some water resistance. The lanolin and natural oils in properly prepared hides help shed moisture, but once thoroughly wet, they lose their insulating value and take a long time to dry. The clothing also had to be durable and repairable. Tears or holes needed to be sewn shut quickly before they expanded. Weak spots had to be reinforced. A failure in your clothing in extreme cold could be as dangerous as a failure in your shelter. Children's clothing deserves special mention. Infants and young children who couldn't regulate their body temperature as well as adults and who weren't as active needed extra protection. Cradle boards, which were used to carry infants, were often lined with especially soft furs and could be completely wrapped to protect the child from wind and cold. Daily life in the winter tipi what? Was it actually like to live day to day in a teepee through a plains winter? Let's walk through what a typical winter day might have looked like. The day began early, even in winter, though the long nights meant that early might still be dark. Someone, often an adult woman or older child, would wake first and tend the fire, adding wood and stirring up the coals to increase the heat. This person would also start melting snow or ice for water and perhaps begin preparing the morning meal. As others woke, the teepee would come to life. People would emerge from under their sleeping robes, still wearing most of their clothing from the night before. If the weather was extreme, no one would be in a hurry to go outside, so morning activities would be conducted within the teepee. The morning meal might consist of dried meat, perhaps softened in hot water or roasted over the fire, and possibly a mush made from dried berries, roots, or corn. Hot drinks, like tea made from various plants, helped warm everyone from the inside. After eating, the day's activities depended heavily on the weather. On better days, still cold but relatively calm, men might go hunting if game signs had been spotted. Hunting in winter was challenging but necessary. Deer, elk, rabbits, and other game were available, and even in deep winter, buffalo herds could sometimes be found. However, hunting in winter was dangerous. Sudden weather changes could trap hunters in blizzards, and even a small injury could be fatal if it prevented someone from returning to shelter. Women's work continued regardless of weather. Inside the teepee, there was always work to be done. Sewing and repair work on clothing, moccasins, and other items was endless. Someone would be scraping hides or working on skins. Food preparation took significant time. Dried meat needed to be pounded or processed, roots and berries sorted and prepared. Many practical crafts continued through winter. Tools were made and repaired. Arrow points were knapped, bows were carved and shaped, which actually was often done in winter because the wood needed to be worked slowly and carefully, and winter provided time for such painstaking work. Children were taught throughout the winter. Young girls learned sewing, hide preparation, and food processing from their mothers and aunts. Boys learned to make tools and weapons and heard stories about hunting strategies and animal behavior. Everyone learned through hands-on practice and observation. Storytelling was a major part of winter life. The long, dark nights were perfect for the oral tradition. Elders would tell stories that conveyed history, taught moral lessons, explained natural phenomena, or simply entertained. These stories were how knowledge was passed down through generations, how children learned about their culture and history, how the community's collective wisdom was preserved. Games were common as well. Children played games that helped them develop skills they'd need as adults, while adults played games of skill and chance. These activities weren't frivolous. They served to maintain social bonds, break up the monotony of being confined during bad weather, and keep people mentally and emotionally healthy through the long winter. When weather permitted, people would venture outside for necessary tasks. Snow needed to be cleared from around the teepee entrance. More wood needed to be brought in from the woodpile. Animal tracks might be checked to determine what game was in the area and where. Community members would visit each other's teepees, maintaining social connections. The evening meal was the main meal of the day, and its preparation would begin in late afternoon. This might be a more substantial meal, especially if hunters had been successful. Meat would be roasted over the fire or boiled in a paunch, which is a bag made from a buffalo stomach that could be filled with water and hung near the fire, or have hot rocks added to it to heat the contents. As darkness fell, the teepee would be sealed up more carefully for the night. The door flap would be closed tightly. The fire would be built up for the night, and everyone would prepare for sleep. Final checks would be made. Was the fire positioned correctly? Was there enough wood to last the night within reach? Were all the tools and weapons where they should be? Before sleep, there might be more storytelling, or quiet conversation, or prayers and songs. Then people would burrow into their sleeping robes, often fully dressed, and the family would sleep through the long winter night, with someone periodically waking to tend the fire. This rhythm repeated day after day through the winter months. Some days were easier, with clear skies and merely cold temperatures. Other days were spent entirely inside the teepee, with blizzard winds howling outside and visibility zero. Those were the days when the strength of the teepee design really showed itself, when the structure that seemed so simple proved itself capable of keeping a family safe through nature's worst: community and cooperation. crucial element of winter survival that's easy to overlook when focusing on the technical aspects of shelter and clothing is the social organization and cooperation that made survival possible. Native American tribes didn't scatter into individual tipis and try to survive winter in isolation. They came together in winter camps, with multiple families positioned relatively close to each other. This wasn't just for social reasons, though those were important, but for practical survival reasons. A winter camp location was carefully chosen. It needed to be in a spot with some natural wind protection, like a valley or an area with a grove of trees. It needed to be near water, though in winter this might mean ice that could be melted. It needed to have access to wood for fires, and it needed to be in an area where game might be found. With multiple families camped together, cooperative hunting was possible. Hunting large game in winter is difficult and dangerous alone, but a group of hunters working together could succeed where individuals might fail. They could also cover more territory in searching for game and could help each other transport heavy kills back to camp. The community also provided a safety net. If one family's food supplies ran short, others could share. If someone was injured or sick, others could provide care. If a family's tipi was damaged, others could help repair it. This mutual support was essential for survival. Knowledge and skills were also shared. Elders who had lived through many winters knew signs that predicted weather changes. Experienced hunters knew where game was likely to be found in different conditions. Skilled craftspeople could teach others better techniques for sewing, hide preparation, or tool making. This knowledge sharing made everyone more capable and more likely to survive. Children in a winter camp weren't just raised by their parents, but by the entire community. Everyone had a role in teaching, supervising, and caring for the children. This ensured that even if something happened to a child's parents, the child would be cared for and would continue to learn the skills needed for survival. Community and cooperation. Social cohesion fostered in winter camps wasn't just about immediate survival. It laid the foundation for the tribe's resilience and adaptability throughout the year. Winter was a time when relationships were strengthened, disputes were resolved, and plans for the coming spring and summer were made. The tipi, as the central hub of family life, facilitated this by creating a warm, communal space where people could gather, share, and connect. Ceremonies and rituals often took place during winter, when the community was less mobile and had more time to focus inward. These events reinforced cultural identity, spiritual beliefs, and collective purpose. The tipi, with its circular design, was more than a practical shelter. It was a symbolic space. The circle represented unity, the cycle of seasons, and the interconnectedness of life. The central fire was not just a heat source, but a spiritual focal point, tying the physical and metaphysical worlds together. The cooperative nature of winter camps also extended to resource management. Food, firewood, and other supplies were sometimes pooled or traded within the camp to ensure no family went without. This system of mutual aid was critical during lean times, such as prolonged blizzards when hunting was impossible, or when a family's stores were depleted due to unexpected events like spoilage or loss during travel. Women played a pivotal role in this cooperative network. While men were often responsible for hunting and protecting the camp, women managed the tipi's interior environment, food preparation, and the production and maintenance of clothing and tools. Their expertise in hide preparation, sewing, and food preservation was as critical to survival as any hunting skill. This division of labor was not rigid. Men and women both contributed to various tasks as needed, but it was highly organized and efficient, reflecting a deep understanding of the group's collective needs. Adapting to the environment. The tipi in action. Tipi's design was not static. It was a living technology that could be adapted to specific conditions. For example, during a particularly harsh winter storm, additional measures might be taken to fortify the structure. Extra poles could be added to the framework for stability, or additional hides could be layered over the existing cover to increase insulation. In some cases, families might bank snow high around the base of the tipi. not just to seal drafts, but to create a windbreak that reduced heat loss and protected the structure from being battered by gusts. The placement of the tipi within the camp was also strategic. Tipis were often arranged in a circle or semicircle, with the doorways facing away from the prevailing wind, typically eastward on the Great Plains, as winds often came from the west or northwest. This arrangement created a microclimate within the camp, where the tipis themselves acted as windbreaks for each other, reducing wind exposure for the entire community. The central fire of each tipi was positioned to maximize heat distribution while minimizing smoke accumulation. And the camp's layout ensured that smoke from one tipi didn't blow directly into another. The adaptability of the tipi extended to its portability. While winter camps were semi-permanent, lasting for months, the nomadic lifestyle of plains tribes meant that tipis had to be moved when necessary, even in winter. If game became scarce or weather conditions worsened in one area, the camp might need to relocate to a better spot. The tipi's design allowed it to be disassembled quickly, poles untied, hides unpinned, and everything packed onto travois, a sled-like structure pulled by horses or dogs, for transport. A skilled family could take down and pack a tipi in under an hour and set it up again in a new location just as quickly. This mobility was a survival advantage, allowing tribes to follow buffalo herds or move to areas with better access to resources like wood or water. The tipi's legacy. Modern applications. The genius of the tipi's design has not gone unnoticed by modern architects, engineers, and survival experts. Its aerodynamic shape, efficient use of materials, and ability to maintain a livable interior environment in extreme conditions have inspired contemporary designs in everything from emergency shelters to eco-friendly architecture. For example, the tipi's conical shape and tilted design have been studied for their aerodynamic efficiency. Modern engineers have noted that the structure's ability to shed wind is comparable to designs used in high-performance tents and even some modern buildings. The use of lightweight, natural materials that are both durable and portable has influenced the development of temporary shelters for disaster relief, where structures must be quick to assemble, resilient in harsh conditions, and easy to transport. The tipi's ventilation system, particularly the use of the smoke hole and ear flaps, has been recognized as a brilliant example of passive ventilation. Modern architects studying sustainable design have drawn inspiration from this, incorporating similar principles into buildings that rely on natural airflow rather than energy-intensive HVAC systems. The liner's role in creating a dead airspace for insulation has parallels in modern insulation techniques, such as double-wall construction or the use of air gaps in high-performance building materials. Even the tipi's social function has lessons for today. Its circular layout fostered community and equality, with no single position dominating the space. This has inspired architects designing communal spaces, such as community centers or educational facilities, where fostering interaction and collaboration is a priority. Survival experts also point to the tipi as a model for off-grid living. Its reliance on locally sourced materials, minimal environmental footprint, and ability to function without modern utilities make it a case study in sustainable survival. Some modern homesteaders and outdoor enthusiasts have built their own tipis, using updated materials like canvas or synthetic fabrics, while retaining the core design principles, the ingenuity of indigenous knowledge. The tipi is a testament to the ingenuity and resilience of the indigenous peoples of the Great Plains. It represents thousands of years of accumulated knowledge, refined through observation, experimentation, and adaptation. Every aspect of the tipi, from its aerodynamic shape to its ventilation system to its use of buffalo hide, was a deliberate response to the challenges of the environment. It wasn't just a shelter, it was a system that integrated architecture, material science, thermodynamics, and social organization into a cohesive whole. This knowledge wasn't written down in books or taught in universities. It was passed down through generations via oral traditions, hands-on learning, and a deep connection to the natural world. The people who designed and lived in tipis understood their environment in ways that modern science is only beginning to quantify. They knew how to read the wind, predict weather patterns, select materials, and manage resources with an efficiency that rivals modern engineering. What's more, the tipi wasn't a one-size-fits-all solution. Different tribes, like the Lakota, Cheyenne, Blackfoot, and Crow, adapted the basic design to their specific needs and environments, incorporating regional materials or slight variations in construction techniques. This flexibility and adaptability are hallmarks of true innovation.
Think of the coldest you have ever been, the biting wind, the deep, numbing cold. Now imagine that winter lasts for 6 months. Imagine there are no stores, no furnaces, no electricity. This was the reality for the native peoples of North America for thousands of years. But they didn't just endure it. They saw the winter not as an enemy, but as a teacher, and they learned its secrets. They discovered that snow could be the warmest building material on Earth, that a simple mixture of meat and fat could become a superfood that lasts for decades, that by wearing 2 layers of fur, they could create a personal climate so efficient it rivals our modern gear. Their greatest survival tool wasn't a tool at all. It was a story passed down through generations, containing everything they needed to know to not just survive, but to flourish. This is the story of the original winter scientists. This is the story of how they built a world of warmth in a world of ice. And this is the story we have almost completely forgotten. Until now. To the untrained eye, to the outsider, the arrival of a northern winter in the centuries before central heating and insulated Gore-Tex was a sentence of death. The world would seemingly die around them. The vibrant greens of the deciduous forests would blaze and fall, leaving skeletal trees clawing at a leaden sky. The endless rolling grasslands of the plains would bleach to a pale gold, then be buried under a featureless, blinding white expanse. In the Arctic, the sun would abandon the land for months, and the very sea would turn to a solid, grinding sheet of ice. The wind, no longer buffered by leaves, would become a razor, slicing across the landscape with a voice that promised oblivion. It was a time of profound silence and stark beauty, a season that demanded everything and forgave nothing. This perception, however, is a fundamental misunderstanding. For the hundreds of distinct Native American nations who called this continent home, winter was not an enemy to be defeated. It was not a void or a punishment. It was a season to be understood, respected, and utilized with a profound, intimate ingenuity that wove together architecture, ecology, and social science. They did not simply endure the cold. They mastered it. They built worlds of warmth within the heart of the freeze, creating shelters that were engineering marvels, clothing systems that outperformed modern gear, and food strategies that turned scarcity into abundance. Their survival was a testament not to brute force, but to intelligent adaptation, a deep and abiding conversation with the natural world. The foundation of this entire system was a philosophical cornerstone that is often overlooked in modern narratives, a deep-seated, reciprocal relationship with the land. The environment was not a collection of resources to be exploited, but a living entity imbued with spirit and intelligence. A hunter did not simply take a deer. He offered a prayer of gratitude and respect for the life that would now sustain his own family. A woman gathering birch bark for a wigwam would do so with care, ensuring the tree could continue to live. This worldview fostered a level of observation and understanding that was, quite literally, life-saving. They knew which south-facing slopes retained the sun's warmth longest, where the deer would yard up in deep snow for protection, how the behavior of the snowshoe hare predicted the severity of the coming winter, and the precise properties of every plant, animal, and mineral in their territory. This knowledge was not academic. It was the bedrock of existence, passed down through generations in stories, songs, and daily practice. From this foundational knowledge arose the 3 tangible pillars of winter survival, a triad of interconnected systems that we will explore in exhaustive detail. Shelter. Clothing and food shelter was the first line of defense. It was the artificial climate, the refuge from the storm. But these were not crude hovels. They were highly specialized structures, perfectly adapted to their regional environments. The iconic igloo of the Inuit was a masterpiece of snow engineering, its dome shape and wind-packed blocks creating a super-insulated space heated by body heat and a single oil lamp. The wigwam of the northeastern and subarctic tribes used a framework of saplings covered in layers of birch bark, reed mats, and animal hides, creating a portable, weatherproof home warmed by a central fire. On the Great Plains, the sedentary tribes like the Mandan and Hidatsa built earth lodges, massive, semi-subterranean structures covered in sod that provided incredible thermal mass, keeping them cool in the blistering summer and stable and warm in the bitter winter. Each design was a direct response to the local materials and climate, a perfect marriage of need and availability. Clothing was the mobile shelter, the personal microenvironment that allowed for travel, hunting, and work outside. This was not merely about covering the body. It was about creating a sophisticated, layered system of insulation and weatherproofing. The principle of using air as an insulator was well understood. Typically, an inner layer of soft fur, like rabbit or otter, would be worn with the fur facing the skin for comfort. An outer layer of tougher hide, like caribou, moose, or buffalo, would have the fur facing outward to shed wind and snow. The air trapped between these two layers and within the furs themselves formed a barrier that retained body heat with stunning efficiency. Specific garments like the Inuit parka, with its large, ruffled hood often lined with frost-shedding wolverine fur, or the knee-high mukluk stuffed with dry grass, were the result of centuries of refinement, making them arguably superior to many types of early European winter gear. Finally, food was the fuel for the furnace of the body. The key to winter nutrition was not a desperate daily search, but a strategy of abundance built during the spring, summer, and fall. The autumn was a time of intense, community-wide activity. Large-scale buffalo hunts on the plains provided tons of meat that needed to be preserved. The solution was pemmican, a concentrated, non-perishable food made from pounded dried meat, rendered fat, and sometimes dried berries. This was the ultimate survival food. Lightweight, incredibly nutrient-dense, and capable of lasting for years. In the woodlands, the three sisters, corn, beans, and squash, were harvested and stored in deep-lined storage pits that acted as natural refrigerators. Berries were dried, fish were smoked, and every edible plant was gathered and cached. Winter itself was also a time for hunting and ice fishing, aided by the indispensable snowshoe, which allowed hunters to travel over deep snow that would immobilize large game. These three pillars, shelter, clothing, and food, formed the physical framework of survival, but they were all held together by a fourth, intangible, yet most crucial element: community and knowledge. No one survived a northern winter alone. The shared body heat in a lodge, the shared labor of keeping a fire lit, the collective wisdom of the elders, and the stories told to children during the long nights were all part of the social technology that was just as vital as any spear or snow knife. It was a holistic system, a way of life honed over millennia to not just confront the cold, but to create a rich, meaningful existence within its embrace. The architecture of warmth, shelter, and fire. If clothing was the personal fortress against the cold, then the home was the communal citadel. The diverse shelters built across the continent were not merely random assemblages of local materials. They were the result of meticulous observation, refined engineering principles, and a deep understanding of physics passed down through generations. They were climate control systems crafted from snow, earth, wood, and hide, the igloo, the mastery of snow. To the uninitiated, the idea of living in a house of snow seems paradoxical, a testament to desperation. For the Inuit of the Arctic, it was the pinnacle of efficient design, a life-saving technology that turned the most abundant and seemingly hostile material into a protective womb. The process began not with a haphazard gathering of snow, but with a critical assessment of its quality. Not just any snow would do. They sought out snow transformed by wind into a dense, compacted layer, pukak or apun, that could be cut into strong, interlocking blocks using a specialized snow knife, the pana. The consistency was crucial. It had to be soft enough to cut, yet strong enough to bear weight without crumbling. The construction itself was a feat of architectural genius. The blocks were not laid in straight rows, but in a continuous rising spiral. This created a perfect, self-supporting dome, a shape inherently strong against the relentless pressure of the wind. Each block was shaved and angled with precision, leaning inward to form a perfect parabolic curve that distributed weight evenly. The final key block at the top was lowered into place from the inside, locking the entire structure into a state of tensegrity. But the true magic of the igloo was in its finishing touches. The builder would crawl inside and meticulously chink every crack between the blocks with loose snow, sealing the shelter from drafts. A low tunnel entrance, dug below the level of the main floor, acted as a cold sink. Since cold air is heavier than warm air, it would settle in this tunnel, while the warm air generated by the occupant's body heat and the gentle glow of a soapstone oil lamp, the quillic, would rise and be trapped in the living space. A small ventilation hole was often poked near the top to prevent dangerous carbon monoxide buildup. The result was astonishing. Inside an igloo, the temperature could comfortably sit at 32 degrees 0 C or even higher, while outside the Arctic night could plunge to 50 degrees 46 degrees or lower. The snow walls, far from being cold, acted as a superb insulator, and the body heat of the occupants would even glaze the interior walls with a thin layer of ice, further strengthening the structure. For larger family groups or longer stays, multiple igloos could be connected by tunnels, forming a veritable winter village under the snow, complete with storage alcoves and communal areas. The wigwam and the longhouse, the insulated forests of the woodlands, south of the tree line. In the vast subarctic and northeastern forests, the primary building material shifted from snow to wood. Here, tribes like the Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, Algonquin, and Wampanoag perfected the wigwam from the Algonquin word for dwelling. Often confused with the more conical teepee of the plains, the wigwam was a dome-shaped, semi-permanent structure designed for winter comfort. Its construction started with a framework of long, flexible saplings, cedar, spruce, or hickory, which were driven into the ground in a circle and then bent and lashed together at the top to form a robust arched dome. This framework was then covered with a sophisticated multi-layered cladding. The first layer was often rolls of birch bark, peeled in large sheets from trees in the spring. Birch bark is waterproof, lightweight, and remarkably strong. Over this they would place mats woven from cattail reeds or cedar bark, adding a thick layer of insulative dead air space. Finally, for the winter, an outer layer of animal hides, elk, moose, or bear, might be added, or additional layers of bark and insulating boughs. The entrance was covered with a heavy hide door, and a smoke hole at the top of the dome could be adjusted with a flap to control the draft from the central fire. The combination of the small interior volume and the thick, multi-layered walls made the wigwam incredibly warm and secure against the howling winds of a nor'easter. For larger, more sedentary tribes like the Haudenosaunee Iroquois, the longhouse was the winter stronghold. These magnificent structures, sometimes over 100 feet long, were built from a sturdy frame of upright posts and crossbeams, clad in sheets of elm or birch bark. While their size made them harder to heat than a wigwam, they were designed for communal living. Multiple families, each with their own designated space along the central corridor, shared the warmth. Several fires running down the center of the longhouse provided heat, with smoke escaping through smoke holes in the roof. The collective body heat of dozens of people, combined with the shared fires, created a stable, if smoky, microclimate that sustained the community through the long winter. The Earth Lodge, the subterranean fortress of the plains. On the Great Plains, where trees were scarce but grass and soil were abundant, tribes like the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara built the most permanent and imposing winter dwellings, the Earth Lodge. These were not temporary shelters, but substantial, semi-subterranean homes that housed extended families. Construction was a massive communal effort. First, a large circular pit was dug several feet deep. An incredibly robust framework of heavy logs and beams was erected over this pit, forming a large domed roof. This frame was then covered with a layer of willow branches or grass, followed by a thick waterproof layer of sod. The entire structure was then blanketed in earth. The engineering brilliance of the Earth Lodge lay in its use of thermal mass. The earth covering the lodge acted as a giant heat sink. In the summer, it kept the interior cool by absorbing heat. In the winter, having absorbed solar energy, it slowly released that stored warmth, maintaining a remarkably stable and comfortable temperature inside, often around 50 degrees or 10 degrees, regardless of the blizzards raging outside. The entrance was a long covered tunnel that served the same purpose as the igloo's entrance, trapping cold air. A central fire provided direct heat and light, and a smoke hole in the roof, often with a unique bullboat-shaped wind deflector, ensured proper ventilation. These lodges were so effective that they formed dense, fortified villages where people lived in comfort for the entire winter. storing their vast surpluses of food within the safety of the community. The pit house, an ancient and widespread solution. The earth lodge was a highly evolved form of an even more ancient concept, the pit house, used for thousands of years by cultures across the continent, from the ancestral Puebloans of the Southwest to the tribes of the Columbia Plateau. The basic principle was the same. By digging the floor of a dwelling below ground level, builders took advantage of the Earth's stable temperature, which remains around 50-55 degrees F, 10-13 degrees CT, just a few feet down. A simple log and beam framework over the pit was then covered with brush, bark, and a layer of earth. It was a simple, highly effective, and low-tech solution that provided exceptional protection from both winter cold and summer heat. The sacred hearth, the central role of fire. In every one of these diverse structures, the fire was the literal and spiritual heart of the home. It was far more than a source of heat. It was the kitchen stove, the source of light for crafts and storytelling, the dryer for wet clothing, and a sacred element around which the family gathered. The design of the fire was also sophisticated. In the igloo, the kulik, typically tended by the woman of the house, was a lamp, not an open flame. It burned rendered seal or whale blubber, providing a clean, steady, and safe heat source. In wood-based dwellings, the central fire was carefully managed. Hearths were often lined with stone, and the fire was banked with ashes at night to preserve coals for rekindling in the morning, a critical skill in a world without matches. The smoke that permeated these dwellings, while hard on the eyes and lungs by modern standards, served a purpose. It helped to cure and preserve meats and hides hanging from the rafters and acted as a natural insecticide. From the crystalline perfection of the snow igloo to the earthen bulk of the Plains Lodge, native architecture was a direct and brilliant dialogue with the local environment. It demonstrated that true shelter is not about fighting nature, but about understanding its laws and working in harmony with them to create a sanctuary of warmth, safety, and community in the depths of winter. The second skin, technology of clothing. A shelter provided a communal refuge, but it was clothing that enabled the individual to move, hunt, and work within the winter world. The garments created by indigenous peoples were not simply coverings. They were highly engineered, personal microenvironments, a second skin that often surpassed the functionality of the heavy wool and linen worn by contemporary European settlers. The creation of this clothing was a complex, multi-stage process that transformed raw materials from the land into a system of unparalleled insulation, waterproofing, and durability. The principle of layering and the science of dead air. The foundational concept behind northern indigenous clothing was not a single, heavy garment, but a sophisticated layered system. This approach is identical to the principle used in modern high-performance outdoor gear. The key insulator is not the fabric itself, but the air trapped within and between the layers. A typical system involved two primary layers. The inner layer. This was worn against the skin and was designed for comfort and moisture management. It was typically made from the softest, most pliable furs, such as rabbit, beaver, or otter, with the fur facing inward. The dense, soft pile created countless tiny air pockets that trapped body heat, while the leather side, tanned to a velvety suppleness, was comfortable against the skin. The outer layer. This was the shell, designed to protect against wind, snow, and abrasion. It was constructed from tougher, more durable hides like caribou, moose, or seal, with the fur facing outward. The outward-facing fur served a critical purpose. It caused snow and frost to beat up and fall away rather than melting and soaking the hide. The leather was often smoked or oiled to enhance its water-resistant properties. The genius was in the combination. By wearing these two layers, a space of dead air was created between them. This stagnant air acted as a superb buffer against the external cold, while the body's own heat warmed the inner layer, creating a stable, mobile microclimate, the art and alchemy of tanning, the transformation of a raw animal hide into soft. Durable and rot-resistant leather was one of the most vital and labor-intensive technologies, a skill almost universally held by women. This process, known as tanning or brain tanning, was a form of alchemy. It began with the strenuous scraping of the hide to remove all flesh and fat. The hide was then stretched and dehaired. The central step involved breaking down the stiff, rawhide fibers. This was often done by applying a paste made from the animal's own brains, a perfect natural emulsifier containing oils and lecithin, which bonded with the collagen fibers to keep them supple. The hide was then worked for hours, stretched, pulled, and rubbed over a rope or dull blade in a process called softening. This physical manipulation was essential. It separated the individual fibers, making the leather soft and pliable. Finally, the hide was often smoked over a slow, rotten wood fire. The smoke infused the leather with creosote and other chemicals, making it highly water-resistant and preventing it from turning hard again if it got wet. The result was a material that was strong, breathable, wind-resistant, and beautiful, a perfect substrate for winter. Garments. A wardrobe for the cold, specific garments. And their genius thought the application of these materials and principles resulted in specific garments that were marvels of functional design. The ist parka, Inuit kulitak, atigi. This was the quintessential Arctic outer garment. It was typically knee-length, hooded and roomy enough to allow for air circulation without restricting movement. Its most famous feature was the large, ruffled hood, meticulously lined with fur from a wolverine, wolf, or dog. Wolverine fur was particularly prized because its unique guard hairs shed frost from human breath, preventing a deadly buildup of ice around the face. The cut was often tailored with gussets and shoulders that allowed for free movement of the arms for hunting and paddling. Mukluks and moccasins. Footwear was critical. High-top moccasins, or the boot-like mukluks of the subarctic and Arctic, were crafted from smoked moose or caribou hide with rawhide soles for durability. They were designed to be roomy. Before a journey, they would be stuffed with dry shredded grass or sedge. This grass was the secret weapon. It absorbed moisture from sweat, could be replaced with fresh dry grass when damp, and created a thick layer of insulation that kept feet warm even in extreme cold. The soft, flexible soles also provided superior grip on icy surfaces and allowed the wearer to feel the ground, an essential trait for hunters. Leggings, mittens, and robes. Leggings, separate from the breechcloth, were worn from waist to ankle, providing essential protection for the legs without the bulk of a single heavy garment. Mittens, always preferable to gloves for their superior warmth, were made from fur or hide, often with a removable liner. For the most brutal weather, immense robes or blankets were worn, often made from the hides of buffalo, bear, or wolf, with the fur serving as a formidable barrier against the wind. The power of the seamstress. Women as technological innovators. The creation of this clothing was a domain of female knowledge, skill, and power. From the arduous task of tanning to the intricate art of sewing, women were the engineers of survival. They used sinew, thread made from animal tendons, for its incredible strength and because, when it absorbed moisture, it would swell and tighten the seam, making it nearly waterproof. The stitches themselves were a form of technology. Different stitches were used for different purposes, some for strength, some for flexibility, some for creating waterproof seams. The woman's ability to produce durable, warm, and well-fitting clothing was as critical to her family's survival as the man's ability to hunt. She transformed the bounty of the hunt into the very fabric of life, making her role not just complementary, but central to the mastery of the winter environment, the winter larder. Food. Preservation and procurement, a warm shelter and insulated clothing were meaningless. Without the caloric fuel to stoke the human furnace, the key to winter sustenance was not a desperate day-to-day search for food, but a sophisticated strategy of plenty, built during the seasons of abundance. The autumn was not a time of winding down. It was a period of intense, focused, and community-wide activity.